very warm welcome to webinar number 171. And this is the first one after the summer break. So great to be back on air and great to be engaged in these topics. As you know, the idea of thought leadership is to inspire thinking, to give insights, to challenge ideas, and to think about issues that are going to happen on the horizon and better prepare ourselves for it. And today, the topic is one that affects us all, and that is all about ransomware. What's the threat and how are we going to manage it going forward? I've got Shrey in the background helping me with the slides, and I've got three panelists. And what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to introduce the panelists. And as soon as they've introduced themselves, I'm going to invite each of them to make an opening statement. 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to say about the subject matter. One thing I would encourage you to do, I've got a question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, you'll see in a minute. And as soon as you're ready, put a question on there and we'll endeavour to incorporate into the discussion. There's some people who sent me questions in advance. So I've always got those in reserve, and I'm happy to incorporate those with you too. Without further ado then, let's go and meet our panelists. Three experts, all coming at this from a slightly different angle. And so what I'm going to first of all do is hope Shrey can get the panelists on the screen. There we are. They've arrived on the screen. And let me go first of all to Mark. Mark, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Beaudry. I'm an assistant professor at Worcester State University. It's in Massachusetts, and I teach in the criminal justice department.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. I've known Mark for a long, long while, and it's his idea to put this panel together. He wrote to me ages ago about doing it. Thanks, Mark, for that. And Antoinette in New York, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Antoinette King, and I am founder of Credo Cyber Consulting based in New York, and I consult with firms regarding cybersecurity matters.
Thank you very much indeed. And our third panelist, Andrew. Andrew, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning to everybody in America. Good afternoon to the UK. My name is Andrew Peden. I'm the CEO at L5L Solutions based out of New York, and we provide simple evidence-based cybersecurity solutions that reduce risk and increase cyber resiliency. And I believe that cybersecurity is a business enabler and a strategic business problem that must be solved by courageous leaders with a proactive and prevention-first mindset. Thanks for having me.
I like that. I like that. Thank you very much indeed. Well, as you know, for those of you who are regular attendees to our webinars, what we now do is we go to each of the panelists and say 3 minutes to tell us what you think about this subject matter. We'll go to each of them in turn in the same order. And don't forget, if you've got a question or an issue you'd like to raise, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, Mark, your opening statement, please.
Great, thanks. First, I want to say that the cost of ransomware to victims globally has drastically increased to about $20 billion as of 2021. It's predicted actually that this will rise to about 265 billion by 2030. And basically what ransomware does is it basically locks out people from using their computer. And there are two types: the locker ransomware, which basically reduces the entrance, and also the crypto ransomware, which restricts access to files. Now, this is important because the nation state actors, and I want to just briefly just cover the four that are major concern right now, at least to the United States, is China, because China looks at intellectual property theft, as well as Russia. Russia is our second one. And both of those are really looking to gather theft of intellectual property, both public information and private information. So those are two big ones. And a lot of that's done through acquisitions, just so you know. The third one I wanted to talk about was North Korea. And there are many groups in North Korea that are going after financial institutions, basically attacking recently a lot of crypto currency organizations, and they have a lot of tools that they can use to take this and money launder using money laundering techniques. And then finally, and probably the most up and coming, is Iran, state sponsored through a lot of their intelligence agencies, or I should say their intelligence agency, as well as their Revolutionary Guard. So one of their advanced persistent threat, number 42 is one of them, but there are many others. They're also doing a lot of attacks against critical infrastructure, not only in the Middle East, but also in other nations right now. So there's a huge amount of this type of malware being used by these nation state actors. Thank you.
Mark, brilliant. Very, very good context setting, and appreciate that. Okay, Antoinette, your opening statement, please.
Absolutely. So just to piggyback on what Mark was talking about, in addition to these nation state actors, ransomware really has become a $1 trillion business. There are organizations that aren't necessarily even caring about the data or really wanting to exfiltrate the data, but they really care about the business of ransomware, right? So since COVID, we've seen a drastic uptick. I mean, from 2020 to 2021, there was a 97% increase in ransomware. Why is that? Well, we've all migrated to a new remote work environment, right? And it doesn't look like that hybrid work environment is going to go away. So that equals a much larger attack surface because there are more people that are working outside of the physical boundaries of normal business. And in particular, North America and Europe have been the greatest targets of these attacks. So when we think about, what Mark was talking about, those nation state actors, wars used to be fought nation state versus nation state, right? So we're talking about military activities that are fortified and funded by government agencies. Well, now we've got nation state actors. We have other, non-nation state actors that are targeting individual organizations and even down to the individual citizen. So when we think about national security, we're no longer able to protect citizens the way that governments normally do, right? So we now are transferring a lot of the risk to the individual. And if individuals don't understand how to navigate online, or they're not aware of the risks and threats globally, well, now it just becomes, a playground for all of these bad actors. So I think it's really important when we think about ransomware and we think about the threat landscape, especially on a global, the global threat landscape, we have to recognize that the risk has now gone all the way down to the individual. And so we can't just apply controls to any environment and think that we're going to be able to get out of this. We can't throw technology at it. We really have to understand the human element of the risk factor, because the ransomware typically will target the individuals. So that's where I'm at. The idea of this great resignation and how a lot of people there's a lot of startups and there's a lot of BYOD environments. It just creates this very muddy threat landscape where we can't expect the government to protect us anymore.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. My goodness me, this is serious stuff. Andrew, your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you for having me again. So I'm just going to kind of to seamlessly integrate onto what Dr. Mark and Antoinette said. So the asymmetric threat has left the building and the attack surface area has exponentially increased, especially due to COVID, right? There's 4 billion people connected to the internet, 40 trillion devices connected. So all those numbers everybody knows. You can look on the news, Google everything, but apparently nobody cares because this problem has not been solved. So we're still using these same failed strategies that got us here in the first place. So to talk about incident response, which was the topic that we're talking about today, or my topic, at least the 3 pieces that we're talking about. You can talk about NIST or SANS as kind of like a framework for incident response, right? Preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and then lessons learned. But as a holistic, or looking at the risk or cyber risk holistically across the enterprise, it all starts with a conversation. What does that mean? So we need to know what we're actually trying to protect before we can respond to an incident, right? So we have to identify our assets, our critical assets, our crown jewels. We have to do that through an assessment, defining what the critical assets are, and everything's based upon a risk-based approach, right? What's critical to our business functions to continue to be available. I just wrote an article on the fact that I want to flip the script on the CIA triad and put availability first to achieve more positive outcomes, because again, like I said, if confidentiality and integrity were at the top of mind of everybody, it would have been solved a long time ago. But when you think about availability or unavailability of systems for agencies, organizations, cities, states, nations, governments, people, then it's a problem, right? When that's not available. So if we flip the script, and maybe we'll change the mindset and start to actually have a more preventative approach at this through a different mindset and kind of solve the problem, or at least have a different view. After we assess it, we have to discover what our gaps and vulnerabilities are, usually done by a security risk assessment. That will give us the network visibility that we need. Network visibility is a huge issue in either, whether it's IT or ICS OT environment. Knowing the unknowns, what's on your network, who's left that hasn't been audited out of your system, what critical controls are actually working, what critical controls are actually efficacious, what critical controls you actually have in place that are being utilized to the maximum potential. So that's network visibility, right? And that's data, but it's contextualized data, because data without context is just data, right? But data with context is information. It's actionable intelligence that we can use to make informed decisions. That gives us trending analysis, and then we can move on to strategy. And with the strategy, we can deploy a complete defense in-depth stack of advanced cybersecurity solutions to mitigate risk, increase efficacy, transparency, and cyber resiliency. And then what do? We optimize. And we continuously rinse and repeat. It's a feedback loop. And the optimization is continuous evaluation, continuous measurement, continuous monitoring, because without monitoring, you can't know where you were, where you're at, where you're going. If, going from a baseline with that trending analysis, you need that contextualized data and continuous monitoring. And that comes into automation. When you start to talk about scale, the human needs an augmented automation force multiplier to help them to reduce that risk and reduce and mitigate those vulnerabilities that they couldn't before or by themselves, right? So we use the automation. We start talking about immutable blockchain data lakes, anonymized encrypted data lakes. We start talking about hyper automation, providing preventative intelligence. And again, like I said, it's just a rinse and repeat. And that instant response is all included in there, right? So we need to define, communicate, respond, but we need to know what we're protecting before we create response teams and get that digital forensics and, cyber insurance, lawyers, internal, external, mutual aid assistance partners. We have to know what we're protecting first. So thanks. Sorry, I went a little over. I apologize.
No, that's fine. Very, very good stuff. Very, very good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, let me come back to you. And when you hear about this, we've known for a long time this has been a problem, right? There's nothing new about the problem, which leads me to wonder, how could we have got to a stage where, by the sounds of it, offenders are running amok, and let me use my words, and victims are being negligent? Is that accurate?
So, yeah, it is. The problem we have is the biggest, well, there's actually two main problems. The first one is that companies or organizations are failing to patch and upgrade both software, hardware, and other technology components, they're called, right? And they just fail to do that because they don't want to. It's going to be too costly. That's one of the biggest problems. The second is ransomware actually isn't the number one problem. It's actually business email compromises. So by using these emails, they're compromising systems, and that's how they're actually, or I should say, one of the ways of the many that they're actually getting in. So that has to have more attention as well.
Okay, I mean, Antoinette, from your point of view, do you agree with that first and foremost? And secondly, it seems an incredible situation to me as an outsider, so a non-expert. This could ever have been allowed to happen. I mean, have cybersecurity people been negligent? I mean, have they not been on the ball and communicating this?
So there's twofold. I think the lack of sharing of information from the private and public sector really, to me, is the root cause of a lot of where we are today. So in the US, critical infrastructure is managed and owned by private industry. And it's been targeted for decades. We know that. Industrial control systems are typically old systems, outdated, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are involved. The problem is that a decade and a half ago, the federal government and its agencies that were involved in any kind of cyber reconnaissance or cyber operations were aware of what was going on. But the lack of transparency as to what the threats and the risks were to these critical infrastructure organizations resulted in kind of, now we're trying to play catch up. And now they're realizing, oh shoot, we probably should have gotten them involved. But you know, when it comes to cyber operations, sometimes you don't want necessarily people to know what's going on because there are other things happening in the background. And so we've got this constant, you know, trying to play catch up. Yes, you're absolutely right. The bad guys are running amok. And I think that there is just this, I hate to say it, but, you know, to Mark's point about updating systems and firmware, in some cases, it's lack of resources. In other cases, it's just lack of understanding of what the risks really, truly are. In operational technology and IoT and industrial IoT, devices are designed for ease of use and first to market. Security has never been a principle of, you know, security by design has truly never been a principle of engineering. And so there has to be this crossover, but it hasn't happened. I often say that when I have conversations about things like social media and the importance of controlling your digital exhaust and your cyber footprint, I feel like Chicken Little running around screaming the sky is falling, because most people have become so desensitized to ransomware attacks and cyber attacks and data breaches. It's just become a way of life, and they kind of just accept it. What they don't realize, as Mark alluded to earlier, is that when you have countries like China and Russia that are taking all of this data and creating digital twins of, you know, and utilizing it for mis and disinformation, the ransomware is just basically the funding of all of this other stuff. They're using the ransomware to get the capital funding that they need. In particular, Iran, for example, you know, we apply all these sanctions on these countries. They don't care about the sanctions. They just use the payoffs on the ransomware to fund all of these other things. It's kind of their way of laundering money, if you will. So I think that individual citizens just have become desensitized. And so therefore, we're just kind of stuck in this situation now where we're all trying to do the best we can to educate people.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let me get to a question from Dr. Janice Goldsborough-White. Let me come to you, Andrew, and a really big one, right? If you won't let me blame the cybersecurity world, which you might, but if you won't, boards, surely boards of organizations have to take ultimate responsibility. Everything you said, Andrew, in your opening statement about what needs to be done, start surely with the board saying this is a big deal. Why on earth are they not saying it? Or are they saying it in the wrong language, in the wrong way? Something's gone wrong somewhere, Andrew, hasn't it?
Something has gone wrong somewhere. Yes, I agree. I'm not going to lay the blame on this on cybersecurity practitioners. That would be like laying the blame on healthcare on nurses. So I think that's totally inaccurate. You know, accountability, leadership, quote unquote. You know, boards who have the money to create their own insurance, you know, a captive organization to have that line item on their books to just write it off when an event occurs. The defeatist mindset of not if, but when it's going to happen, and just let it happen and not spend money on prevention and education and their systems. Because let's face it, if one person takes down your system sucks. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of nuances here. I think boards are smart. They're compartmentalized a lot of times, my experience going into boards, but they're smart people. People have good intentions. I don't believe people wake up and say, oh, we're going to do something bad today. I think they have good intentions. I think, you know, they're in their lane trying to do their agenda or get their things accomplished, their projects. What needs to occur, though, is there needs to be ownership, right? Accountability, I said before. And I'll give you an example. You know, I said about leadership, but, you know, the Biden administration, I'm not talking about any administrations or get political, but the Biden administration just put out an order saying that the EPA was going to be in charge of cybersecurity audits for the water facilities in the US, and they're going to put the sanitation inspectors in charge of that. So I don't see anything in there about standardization. I don't see anything in there about audit policies or procedures. So there's a lack of leadership there, in my opinion. I just don't see how, and I'm not the only one. There's been plenty of people in the cyber and ICS and OT world has been very vocal about this. I just don't see how that's a good idea. And when we keep coming up with these ideas that just got us here in the first place, that's the human issue. You know, IBM put that report out back 8 years ago about how 95% of these attacks have a human factor to them. Well, when you have the same failed leadership policies implemented, there's the human problem, right? So I think it's a human issue, and I think it's going to be solved, you know, in procurement, you talked about before, or Antoinette brought it up. I think it's going to be solved in procurement wording. You know, it's customer driven. OEM people, people have been aware of this in the industry. OEM manufacturers, they're aware of this. They have the sales, you know, the life cycle as far as software development. It's not that they're not aware, they're very aware, but boards, businesses, they have a bottom line. They're out to make money, right? So unless it's put into procurement, let's put into insurance, regulations is a piece of it. I think there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle that need to come together, and people need to be held accountable.
Martin,
Okay.
can I just add
Yeah,
one thing?
you can very quickly, because I want to move topics if you don't mind, Antoinette. Yeah, do come back.
Absolutely. Security has always been seen as a cost center. So when the boards are looking at the bottom line, security always gets kind of the least amount of attention because has always been seen as a cost center.
So I have to jump in there, Martin. And I like Antoinette, and Antoinette's on a panel of mine down at CyberCon at GSX, and and we get along. My point is, I'm going to totally push back on that, because to me, that mindset is so outdated, it needs to be squashed immediately. And I know Antoinette agrees with me, but I can't, it really bothers me when we bring up the fact that security is a cost center. It's not, it's a business enabler. If you don't have your systems up, if you don't have your people safe, if you don't have your organization safe, then you don't have a business. You don't have an organization, you have an agency, you don't have a nation, you have a state, nothing. So we need to get rid of that security as a cost center mindset statement. Just stop saying it entirely. Sorry.
You know, interesting point. The same argument exists in the physical security world, exactly the same one. We've come across that. Okay, let me come across. I want to come back to Mark. Mark, listen, yeah. I had an email from David who works in Africa and actually can't make the webinar, but he asked me this question. Can the panel put a perspective? You've mostly spoken about state actors, actually. And the question is about non-state actors and the extent to which that is understood as a threat. Well, how big is it? Is it different type of response needed? So Mark, good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So right now we have a lot of what we'll call criminal or mercenary hackers out there. And a lot of these malware as a service tools, ransomware being one of them, are being developed. And what's happening is they're putting them out on the dark web. So basically anyone without any technological skills, all they have to do is buy these toolkits, right? For $5, $10, whatever they're selling for. And they deploy them and they, conduct an active ransomware or any type of malware really. But what happens is not only do they get the money, a percentage of that money then goes back to these non-state or criminal hackers, right? So it's a business for them and it's all about the money. The second part of that, if I can just expound on it a little bit, is more and more of these hacker organizations are actually getting into cracking, what they call crackers, cracking cryptocurrency and blockchain. And blockchain is a huge target right now. And that's one of the things that they're going after. And they're making big money. The Iranian hackers just created a nice tool actually to do that. So they're actually breaking into these systems and siphoning off these cryptocurrencies. I thought
blockchain couldn't be broken into.
Well, some of these tools are finding different ways of doing just that, and that's going to be the big attraction. Well, that in the cloud, I should say, but that's going to be a big attraction.
Goodness me. Let me come to you, Antoinette. I want to stick with criminals, if I might, for a minute. Do we have a sense of the extent to the number of the percentage which is state acting and non-state acting? And are they different types of attack needing different types of solution? Or is it just one problem here?
Okay, so attribution is difficult. And off the top of my head, I really don't know what the statistics are of nation state versus non-nation state. What we need to look at here is intent. right? And what the bad actor is trying to get out of this. So in nation state situations, typically it's exfiltration of data for secrets, right? Whether it be an article just came out yesterday about, F-35s they're stopping production or distribution of F-35s because they realized that there were some components that were Chinese made. Whenever anything is made in China, they have to take the intellectual property. So there are different motivations for nation states over the non-nation state in terms of the way in which the sophistication, if you will, in which they perpetrate these ransomware attacks. Typically, it's done, I think, as Mark had said, and also Andrew mentioned, it's the human element, right? So typically, it's either going to be a phishing or some sort of email compromise. The malware in which they use in order to deploy the ransomware could be a myriad of different things. But as Mark said, you can go onto the dark web right now and buy a toolkit. It's ransomware as a service. You can actually lease it. You don't even have to buy it. And so, it's not as difficult anymore to do it. It used to be nation state actors were the ones that were behind most of this. At this point, the attribution is irrelevant, right? It's just the mechanism of how it's deployed. So the solutions are all going to be the same, but at the end of the day, it really is educating the human element. I always say that 95% of the time, the problem exists between the chair and the keyboard. So it's identity management, understanding how to secure passwords or go passwordless. But I don't think that there's a real inherent difference between the way that you're going to treat it, because at the end of the day, it's your data that has now been encrypted. So the incident response is going to be based on the sophistication of the attack.
Yeah, and let me come to you, Andrew, because I was just about to ask about incident response. So it's another question we've got about, and it's a good, listen, what do you do? I mean, you're all experts, but presumably some people pay the ransom because it's easier, do they? Would you recommend that? I mean, I'm not talking about you as experts now. I'm talking about people out there, Andrew, who are, can I say ordinary citizens, people like non-experts. What do they do, Andrew?
It depends. So it depends a lot. I don't know specifics on people's systems, right? Organizations, but so we'd like to kind of steer them away from paying the ransom. But as an advisor, I can tell you, I kind of look at my clients as patients, right? As having a science background, I can advise you on the best ways to move forward holistically to, reduce your risk on physical, mental, or spiritual health of yourself or your organization. But you may not be compliant to everything I advise, right? So we advise against paying the ransom because then those attackers, the nefarious threat actors, know that you paid the ransom in the first place, and you're not guaranteed that you get the encryption key. You're not guaranteed you get your data back. And here's the fact of the matter is this: once they take your data, once they exfiltrate your data, it's a data breach. Once they exfiltrate your data, it's gone. So no matter whether they give it back to you or not, someone has it still out there. It's out there in the ether. You're never getting it back. So we advise against it, but it doesn't mean that people are not paying it. So yeah, cyber insurance, ransomware negotiators, law firms, these are all things you should have in place. The mutual aid assistance prior, this is all about pre-planning prior to any event taking place. These are part of your IR team, right? So going back to something you guys said before, cyber threat actors, nation states, geopolitical, you got criminals, you have hacktivists, you have protestware now, right? People who are protesting against certain things or aspects of business or geopolitical, whatever. Thrill seekers, insider threats, right? Whether it's by omission or commission, they're all threats. But these threat actors now are, and Mark mentioned and Antoinette mentioned it, but they're going horizontally across your network and lying dormant as long as possible. There's so many different numbers, right? It was something like 200, upwards of 200 days before they were found. I just read an article recently from ZNet, I think it was about 11 days before they're found. Whatever the case is, their goal is to lay dormant within the environment to learn your business critical functions. In an ICS/OT environment, they want to learn what's going to turn, a switch on and off. In the IT environment, they want to learn, where your Salesforce is, where your PHI is, where your PII is, where your business critical information, your critical assets, your crown jewels are. So they want to lay, dormant within your system as long as possible prior to dropping that ransomware, that malicious code, so they can gain as much information as possible. So it's physical and cyber. It's the same thing. The threat actors have a pathway to violence in physical, right, from ideation, planning, acquisition, probing, surveillance to action, and then you have the whole MITRE attack from the same thing from getting into a system to exfiltration. It's the same thing. It's a pathway to violence, a pathway to action, physical and cyber. So the bad guys, bad girls, bad nation states, whatever, they're all trying to recon your system and find out information, that contextualize data as much as possible to achieve more positive outcomes for them.
You know something, I mean, so yeah, Mike, carry on. I was going to say it just sounds so dramatically bad.
It is, and I want to add one additional thing going on to what Antoinette was saying was a lot of these nation states also use what we call false flag techniques, which means that they'll conduct an attack, but they'll make the attack look like it comes from somewhere else, right? So let's say it's Russia. Well, they'll make it look like it's coming from Turkey or some other country, okay? The second thing is these nation states are getting smarter because they're also using the transnational criminal organizations as hackers for them, because then they can't tie it directly back to the state. So they're starting to use all these different techniques that make you think it's coming from somewhere else, when in fact it's really coming from these countries.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let me come to you then next, Antoinette. A question from Dennis Shep. It's about insurers, actually. And it's about the first of all, about whether there is insurance. I think Andrew just says it is possible to get insurance, but perhaps you can clarify that, Antoinette. The second point, though, is of course they've got expertise in negotiation here, we guess, but do they sometimes say we should pay? I mean, isn't it? Because I can just imagine sometimes that's a lot cheaper than what they'd have to pay out in order to get it all going again. Antoinette, put a picture on this for me if you wouldn't mind.
I love the conversation around cyber insurance. So right now, if you are lucky enough to get a policy underwritten, then yes, you can get cyber insurance. My inclination is insurance companies never want to pay, right? And so here's where the tricky part comes in. Insurance companies became hip to the fact that organizations were quickly becoming victimized with ransomware. And at first, insurance companies thought this was a great opportunity for them to earn some revenue, and quickly realized it was not a great investment. So a lot of insurance companies pulled out and don't even underwrite for cyber insurance. The ones that do are smart and are hip and have their own experts. And so the way that they're doing this now is writing the policies with very specific guidelines. Guidelines to the type of attacks that are covered and not covered, guidelines to the various different controls that need to be put in place in order for you to be covered by an insurance or by an incident. So what ends up happening is organizations get their insurance, they sign the policy, they don't read the fine print, and an incident occurs. They either don't follow the right protocol in terms of incident response, and I'm sure Andrew can piggyback onto this. They don't follow the right protocols in terms of incident response, or during the forensics phase of the response, it's discovered that they may be attested to specific controls that they had in place that they didn't necessarily have. Maybe they didn't even realize they were supposed to have it because they never actually read the policy. So I think that organizations who think the transference of risk to cyber insurance has them in the clear are very much mistaken. And if they are covered, they need to be really clear if they're covered for third-party risks. So in other words, if the attack came in through, for example, something like a SolarWinds, where it was a third-party hardware where the bad actors got in, is that covered by your policy? Are you covered if something happens within your organization that affects other companies? So there's a lot of nuances within cyber insurance, and you need to be really, really astute to the type of policy you have and what the coverages are. And as Andrew said earlier, making sure you have a legal expert, not just a lawyer, but an attorney that is skilled in cybersecurity to understand what your coverages are and what they aren't. And Andrew, I'd actually like to defer to you because I know that this piece of the incident response is a really big part of what you guys do as well.
Yeah, and you did mention it, Andrew. Just before you do, I'd be interested in your thought about this cyber insurance. It sounds to me that there are many more limits to it than initially met the eye. But I'd ask you to be brief because I would like to get a question in about crypto as well. So, Andrew.
On cyber insurance, is that what you're asking me?
Yes, yeah, on cyber insurance. I mean, it just seems to me, well, we've just been told that this is buyer beware, be expert. And if you're that expert, you probably don't need it in the first place. I don't know. You tell me, Andrew.
So what I'm hearing is that starting next year, because now it's there's a lot of issues regarding the fact that there's no standardization, right? So one company can send you a form to fill out, an attestation form to fill out. For example, Internet can send a client an attestation form to fill out for cyber insurance. I could send a client an attestation form out, and they're different. There's no standardization across the board. What I'm hearing is that starting next year, critical controls that people are attesting to are going to start being tested. And to me, I'm saying, why hasn't it been done already? So I mean, it's kind of obvious to me, but whatever. I mean, like Internet said, because of Kaseya VSA, and everybody forgets that ConnectWise was the first one to get hacked, but because of Kaseya VSA, MSSPs cannot get insured now or cannot get renewed. So that's a huge issue because of the remote access and downstream supply chain risk, right? So we're trying to work on that with insurance providers, but insurance has drastically increased. I mean, doubling, tripling, quadrupling as far as policy price goes, and with a drastic reduction by at least half of what's covered. So what I'd say is read the policy. If you have questions, make an annotation in the policy and send it back to your provider, broker, whoever it is, and put that risk back on them, or put that, put the risk back on them, have them come back to you and either ask for clarification or make that annotation on it. But I'd say don't lie on your attestation form. If you say you have MFA, make sure it's on. If you say you have critical controls, make sure they're implemented, because once that event, or if that event occurs, I'm not going to say when, I'm going to say if, but if that event occurs and they come in, they're going to send an army of lawyers, an army of accountants, digital forensics, and yeah, they're in a business too, and they want to help, but they want to make money, right? So if you say anything that's wrong or lie, or by omission or commission, you're going to get denied.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mark. I'd like to get a question with you actually, because I hear a lot about this, right? This is how it goes. With the rise of cryptocurrency and NFTs, has there been a marked shift attack on these areas and crypto wallets? And I mean, look, that's a little bit technical for me, but you know that you get it. It's this new area though, cryptocurrency, NFTs, big for cyber attacks or not?
Huge. That's where a lot of organizations or a lot of hacker groups are going after, because these non-fungible tokens, right, which are basically records that control in blockchain all the physical, but mostly the digital, right? So the digital assets, they're called. They're going after them, but they're targeting the specific types of software. Now you have to remember also that cryptocurrency, in typically most people will know maybe of 1 or 2 or 3 types of cryptocurrency. But if you go on to chain analysis or an organization like called Coinbase, there are about 90 to about 1,100 as an estimate of different types of crypto currency. Okay, so they're attacking them, and that's on the rise because that's where the big money. Now it fluctuates because of what the value is going up and down. So, for example, I did some research back in March on Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin was about 37,000 at the time, and that's gone down drastically over the past couple of months. It's starting to go back up a little bit, but you have to look at what the value of these cryptocurrency is and where can they get the biggest amount of dollars per whatever type of theft they're conducting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely sense. I mean, just on these NFTs, one of the things that of all the things I've heard today, I didn't realize that as a non-specialist, blockchain seemed presented to me at least as the ultimate security measure. It was very reliable. It couldn't be attacked. That's how I understood it. But I mean, you're saying not so. It's not like that.
It's the platforms, not the blockchain itself. The blockchain's immutable, but it's those off-ramp platforms that people are utilizing that are those are the ones that are being hacked. So it's the platforms themselves, not the blockchain itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Listen, panelists, coming to the end, I've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I'm going to be strict here. I'd like to know from each of you, strategic level, where should we be looking? What's the main focus we should be looking at in terms of looking to solve this issue? Where, on the strategic level, what would you do if you could do one thing? Andrew.
This is a public-private partnership, right? There needs to be a bridging of the gap between public and private. There's ISAC, there's multiple organizations, there's CISA, you have organizations in the UK, but this is a collective issue. It's a strategic business problem, and it needs to be looked at that way, because it is. When you talk about the 4 pillars of risk: physical, technology, people, and process, it takes the addressing all 4 to solve this problem. There's no black box that can be implemented into any systems to solve it. It takes physical, technology, people, and process. And then in organizations or business, they want to look at the strategy, operations, compliance or regulatory, reputation and brand. And this has to do with all of those risks.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to stop you there because I want to get the other 2 in for just 30 seconds. We're running out of time. Antoinette.
As far as I'm concerned, I think that strategically where we need to focus is education. We need to get people to understand the importance of what their role in security is, whether it's in their personal life or in their professional lives. We can't just rely on IT to fix our problems. Security is everyone's concern.
Interesting. And finally, Mark, this is all your idea. Let me give you the final comment. Where would you prioritize? 30 seconds.
I'm just going to add on to Antoinette's. Right now, we have about 300,000 cybersecurity jobs open, right? We just can't fill them. That is projected by 2025, between 2025 and 2030, that number is going to go up to about 30 million people needed just to fill cybersecurity positions. That's huge. Where are we going to get these people from?
That is a very good note to finish on. Panel, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. I must say, that was a real lesson. I mean, I'm involved with the security world, not so much in your bit, but absolutely fascinating. I'm sure we're going to come back this into the future. So thank you very much indeed to you. A few final comments from me, if I might, just to say thank you very much indeed also to all the questions. Moving on, I just want to tell you about the fact that we're going to be at GSX. And we're going to be at the Cyber Expo, which is taking place in September. So do please join us. If you're at GSX next week or at the Cyber Expo at ISC at the end of the month, do come and say hello to us. Just to let you know that the OSPAs events are open in Australia. In fact, they're closed this evening. Norway, the Cyber OSPAs closes the 19th of September. Cyber OSPAs, 19th of September. Get those entries in. And in Germany and Canada later this month, the UK next month, along with South Africa. And finally, to say we're back next in 2 weeks' time. It's every 2 weeks now, give or take, when the topic is security qualifications and certifications. Where do we look for credibility? All the nonsense out there. And then after that, put this in your diary, 13th of October, a slight change in tack, an interview with an ex-offender who was a gun runner for terrorists and served a lot of time in prison. He's prepared to talk to you about how he did it, what he did, and the lessons that can be learned. So get those dates in your diary. Well, look, thank you very much indeed once again to my panel. Thank you once again to you, the audience, for your questions and for your involvement, whether you're watching now or on in the follow-up. It'll be on the website tomorrow, a copy of this webinar and a blog, so you can check that out. Thanks also to Shrey Singh in the background, and wherever you are in the world, until we meet again, stay safe.